5 weeks after the diagnosis, my grandmother was dead. She was a proud, stubborn woman from the Appalachian Hills. Too proud, too stubborn to see a doctor, until she'd lost 40 pounds and the cancer had her fully in its thrall. The cancer's victory is what brought me to my first wake. I've been lucky growing up. While both my grandfathers died before I was born, my parents were healthy, as were my grandmothers, until one suddenly wasn't. I didn't know death until I was an adult and Grandma Jo had passed. This being my first go-around, I didn't know what to do for the wake. Dress black, look sad. Seemed like a good start. Drove my Jeep to a lovely pearl-white funeral home that I'd passed so many times as a kid without realizing one day I'd be its guest. Gotten into a fender bender at an intersection in front of the rocky funeral home property when I was a teen. Seemed like a lifetime ago. Walked into the inviting space for the first time, felt the immediate, oppressive quiet that only ever accompanies a room with a corpse in it. I signed the guest book. I walked into the main area of the home. Dozens of white upholstered wooden chairs sat in a row like some sort of perverse movie theater. The feature at the front was a handsome brown coffin, smothered in teal and pink flowers. With my mom and dad, I stayed at the back of the room for as long as I could until my feet told me that it was time to begin the ritual. You don't walk towards a coffin so much as it grows to meet you. I didn't want to look at the body, but my eyes did. The cadaver's stillness matched the quiet of the room. The first time you see a dead human being, you can't quite comprehend how little it resembles a living one. The white dress was draped over Grandma's tiny form, one that I had never seen her wear in life. Her fingers were draped over her chest, long, rigid, flaxen. I maneuvered down the macaw line a bit to be closer to her face. It was impossibly pale and featureless. Her eyes were closed, her makeup a powdery mask, looking down at the white visage. I could scarcely comprehend how it ever moved. How the muscles and bone behind the skin ever exerted themselves enough to speak, smile, taste, eat, or scream. I stared at the face, imagining if I could ever again see something so inert or so lifeless. When the mouth twitched. Not realizing what I was doing, I fell back and I jerked into my mom's arm. I was now behind her, positioning her body closer to the thing that shouldn't have moved, but somehow does. My mom looked back at me and perhaps expected to find despair on my face, instead finding fear. "It's okay, honey," she said. "We can go sit down." "No," I said. I'll say goodbye. Lord knows why I wanted to, but I did. I couldn't just not say goodbye to my grandmother because I had hallucinated something impossible. I gingerly stepped back out in front of my mom and came face to dead face once again. Her hands and her head were still as they had ever been. I stared deeply into the closed lids, softly whispering my goodbye. The mouth twitched again. I didn't look away this time. I couldn't. Instead, I placed both my hands on the side of the coffin and I peered in closer. The mouth was no longer twitching. I could see a shape brushing against the inside of the lips like a snake, desperate to escape. The mouth began to open, ever so slightly, and a hissing sound escaped it. The lips parted again and again as though trying to speak, but they were restrained by the wires that held the jaw shut behind them. Finally, the lips, whatever muscle remained, beat the wires like the cancer they couldn't. The mouth opened just barely and enough times in a row to speak in a low, pained rumble. "We're supposed to be in this together." I woke up outside. Still dressed in black. It was a cold autumn afternoon, but I felt tremendously warm. My mom hovered above me, holding a bottle of water. I'd passed out. They never asked me to go back in. In fact, they never asked me to go to the funeral. When the rest of the cars drove off with little flags in their windows, our car drove home. My father procured an ice pack, and I got in bed. I couldn't sleep. The memory of the dead body and what it said to me would come to me in my dreams, every now and then. By day, I'd forget it. Forget that it ever happened well enough. Simply accept that my brain had betrayed me. At night, it was harder. Still, for years, I continued on and lived my life, blessedly free from the touch of death. And then one of my friends died. We were playing basketball at the local gym. I'm not a particularly blessed athlete, but I can hit a 2 or a 3 and giving up the ball easily enough. So I'm always welcome on the court. My friends John, Lewis, and I were playing a game of 3-on-3 with some fellow gym rats. Lewis, all 6 feet 5 inches of him, was our low post man, banging bodies down in the paint, where John and I handled the ball up top. I dribbled down my opponents as best I could, but couldn't generate any space. I turned to my left to pass the ball to John and watched him die. As soon as the ball left my hands, I could see it happen. I didn't know why. John didn't clutch his chest or scream, he just simply fell. The ball sailed harmlessly over his head as he hit the ground. I rushed over to John on the hardwood, and I fell to his side. He was on his back, his mouth open, his eyes closed. My hands hovered over his lifeless form, not knowing what to touch or how to fix. Finally, I picked up his limp head off the ground and positioned it towards me. His eyes were closed, but I could feel them find me. His mouth opened slightly, and he delivered a concise, articulate message. We're supposed to be in this together. We found out later that John had died almost immediately from a massive cardiac event. Something was wrong with his heart, and the basketball game provided just enough kindling to the fire to set it aflame. Everyone agreed that he had died swiftly and painlessly. The damage was so complete that he had died before he hit the floor. I never asked anyone else if they had heard his message, and I somehow knew they wouldn't have. I attended the wake, but stayed on the back. I didn't want to hear what this corpse had to say. I already heard it before. No one seemed to mind. They could see that I was traumatized. And traumatized, I stayed for weeks. I locked myself in my room and I rarely came out. My brain and I had reached an understanding that it was not lying to me. The dead were speaking to me, but I didn't know what they meant. The phrase, "we're supposed to be in this together," rattled around in my head day and night. My dreams were no longer populated by just my grandmother and John's corpse, but all of them, all the bodies that used to be people, were now chatty driftwood. As I retreated further and further into the land of the dead, my mother would occasionally call me or visit me. She could tell something dark was happening inside of me, but didn't know what exactly. I don't blame her then for keeping bad news from me for as long as she could, but eventually she had to share. On one of the recent visits, her eyes were red and puffy and was crying. My other grandmother, my sole remaining grandparent, had a brain tumor. It was terminal. I supported my mom as best I could, as her grandmother was her mom. In the back of my head, however, I knew this just meant there would be another afternoon of one-sided dialogue with the dead. The prospect of another wake terrified me. I was able to get out of seeing John's body for a second time because I had already seen it once. But this was my grandmother. This was my family. There'd be another wake soon, and I would have to do the deathly shuffle back up to the coffin to say my goodbyes. And this time, I'd be expected not to pass out. My grandmother still had some time left, so I resolved myself to be prepared. I needed another wake to attend, a practice wake, if you will. The dead had spoken to me twice, and maybe the third, they would have something new to say. If not, I'd at least be more used to the phenomena and be able to hold myself together when my grandmother expired and uttered her final message. If not, I would at least be more used to the phenomena and be able to hold myself together when my grandma's expired lips uttered their final message. I Googled obituary, which led me to my local newspaper's obituary page. One of the first entries was James Zanderfield, a 59-year-old father of 4. His viewing hours were tomorrow at the same funeral home my first grandmother's body had been in. The next day I arrived back at the funeral home. Dark suit, frown affixed tightly. I exited my car and strode through the doors confidently. I gave my well wishes to the woman in the back. I said I was one of James's coworkers, that we all loved him. I would miss him tremendously. I stuck out a bit as one of the only few Caucasian mourners. Still, it was a mostly big, diverse crowd. Mr. Zanderfield had clearly been beloved. I got in line to approach the casket, and after a bit of a wait, I was in front of what was once James Zanderfield. His dark skin was as still and implacable as my grandmother's white skin had been. I stood and waited, staring down at the corpse. "Get it over with," I whispered under my breath. The body immediately obliged. Its tongue fell out at the limits of its lips and teeth. "I know it's hard with the wires," I said. "Just say it." Once again, the corpse complied. "We're supposed to be in this together." I closed my eyes and I leaned back, nodding. There it was. This was something that just happened to me now, a part of me accepting the situation. The other part of me felt frustration beginning to mount. "What does that mean?" I asked simply and softly. James's face lay still and silent, and I stared at it again, willing it to twitch, willing it to speak. "What does it mean?" I asked again. Still nothing. Softness, silence from the corpse. "What does it mean, James?" I hadn't realized I yelled, but I had. I had gasps and hushed whispers all around me. I turned around and saw wide-eyed mourners scattered around the wooden chairs. I'm sorry for your loss," I muttered, and I walked from the coffin straight to the door. It was colder outside than I remembered. I felt a chill despite my black jacket. The air was as quiet and oppressive as the death chamber had been. From the front porch, I gazed down the hill of the funeral home's property to the road below. The funeral home sat right between the intersection of two roads at an angle. In this part of the country, most roads are at an angle. There's no right or left turns, just right-ish and left-ish. But this intersection had always been particularly beguiling. I watched as a man in a suit as dark as mine exited the sidewalk and braved the non-existent crosswalk to get to a small dirt parking lot on the other side. Suddenly, a car emerged from around the corner to my right. It was moving fast. Too fast. I couldn't see the plate, but surely this was an out-of-towner who didn't know there was a stop sign just past the tree line corner. The collision didn't happen in slow motion like they sometimes say. The movements were quick and abrupt. Like stop-motion animation, the car hit the man, and the man took to the air. I saw his body take flight in stations. First an inch above the hood of the car, then shoulder level, then the roof. Finally flipping and twirling like a marionette high above where the car once was. The body fell back to the cracked gray pavement from a great height. Just as my feet once took me to the edge of the casket, they now took me out into the street. I walked down the hill, careful not to stumble in the grass or the rock outcropping that met the sidewalk. The man in the dark suit sat on the ground. One arm slumped over his chest, the other splayed out, matching his left leg's unnatural angle. Without thinking, I knelt down beside the body and got a closer look. His face was speckled with dirt, gravel, and debris. There was a thin crimson line across the top of his close-cropped hair. His eyes were closed. I gazed at him for what felt like an hour. I was as still as James's corpse inside, waiting to see the twitch, waiting for the mouth to move. Unencumbered by wires or threads that may have later sewn them shut, I silently urged for the mouth to speak, to say the words, to get them over with. The man on the ground didn't speak. Carefully, I reached down and I pressed 2 fingers to his neck. They felt a weak, unsteady beat. I was the first one to make it down to the pavement, but now I could feel the people gathering around me. I turned around to meet them. "You," I said to a man in a tan suit behind me, "call 911. You," I said to the woman next to me, "head down the road, find the driver, make sure they don't go anywhere." Then I proclaimed to the small group behind them, "One of you get in your car, create a roadblock at the corner, and make sure no one else makes it through." I don't know where the words came from, but they arrived all the same. My orders having been delivered, I turned my attention back to the bleeding man on the ground. He seemed as though he could have been one of James's Zanderfield's sons or nephews. He appeared stocky in his ill-fitted suit. Perhaps that was just because of the angle of his body. I took off my black coat and began tearing at it. Don't move him, I thought. They always say not to move someone after an accident. Once the sleeve of my coat was free, I gently applied it to the top of the man's head. I could see a dark shadow of blood begin to stain it. I applied more pressure with my left hand. His leg and hip were likely shattered. Nothing I could do about that. Instead, I looked for more punctures. Sure enough, his red shirt was beginning to grow redder on the lower side of his stomach. I lifted up his shirt to see a gaping, oozing wound. My right hand pressed into it with the remainder of my coat. Suddenly, the man grumbled and slowly moved his head. I gently kept the sleeve placed with my soggy left hand. Am I alive? He muttered. Yes, I said. You've been in a car accident, but you're alive. His eyes opened now, blinking against the twilight sun. How do you know? I guessed. How do you know I'm alive? Because I talk to the dead. I know what they say, and you haven't said it yet. The man nodded, as though that made all the sense in the world. I removed my right hand from the bloody mess, and gently picked up his left hand from his chest. You're gonna be okay, I said. The ambulance is on its way. I don't know how I knew he was going to be out of it okay, but I did. He's going to live through this. Thank you for helping me, the man said. Of course. We're all in this together. We're supposed to be in this together. The ambulance arrived moments later and whisked the man away. The people who I had delegated tasks to had done their jobs. I found out that the man on the ground was James Zanderfield's son, Jimmy. I received news the next day that Jimmy was going to live despite a shattered pelvis, broken leg, and brutal concussion. My grandmother died 2 weeks later. Her body? Didn't say anything.